There have been a wide range of reactions to President Trump's victory in the 2024 presidential election, but one of the most sinister and I think provocative of these reactions has been the so-called 4B movement, which is attempting to convince women to deny sex to their boyfriends and husbands and mates, especially if those people happen to vote for Donald Trump. So in this video, we're going to explore the tenets and a little bit of a short history of the 4B movement, and I'm going to provide an incisive critique of it, explain why I think it's fundamentally flawed in so many ways, and then I'm going to chart forth a path ahead to having a healthier ability to reconcile the differences we have in society that do not involve this kind of ideological posturing. But before we get into that, my friends, hope all of you are doing well. I am Christian Watson. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social commentary with a philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe. Do whatever you can to ensure our channel is successful, my friends. Even if you disagree with me, we are almost at 20,000 subscribers. I'm so excited. I'm so humbled to have all of your patronage. I really believe that our country, and more importantly, Western civilization, is heading into a place where we need thinkers and not provocateurs. We need to build up our ability to deal with concepts that basically govern the world around us but are unseen to the untrained eye. And so if you wish to train yourself to see those concepts, if you wish to consider uncommon angles on the news of the day, the news of the day, or general happenings in society, or you simply wish to support me, then I would encourage you to please like, share, comment, subscribe. Thank you guys so much. Now, please enjoy the video. So, in the immediate reaction to the Trump victory, we've seen, as I mentioned, a wide amount of reactions. We've seen people threatening to leave the country, and we've seen people making wide, generalistic pronouncements about how America's core must be evil for electing President Trump. But we've also seen, and this is perhaps the most absurd, women going on places like TikTok and other venues in the public square to encourage other women to deny sex to men. Now, the logic of this pronouncement, according to these women, and I'll play a few TikTok videos here soon, is that Donald Trump's presidency represents an existential threat, in their view, to bodily autonomy, and Donald Trump as a person, as a figure in politics, is distinctly anti-women due to some of the behavior that the media claims he has engaged in. So before you actually watch these videos, I must address this very quickly. Number one, I think that it is very odd that you have people reacting to politics on the basis of abstract notions, as opposed to reacting to politics on the basis of sound consideration. Perhaps I shouldn't say it's odd. Actually, this is entirely how the art of politics is done. Ever since Edward Bernays, even before then, politics has largely been a game of sensationalism and rhetorical prowess over substance and cool reason guiding our considerations of the day. But in a world where information is so widely accessible, no matter what your partisan predilections are, you should be able to disabuse yourself of obviously false notions. Many of you don't need me to tell you that President Trump has, throughout his career, over the past 9 years of him being in the executive branch and him being a presidential candidate, has empowered women to lead in different areas of his administration and different areas of his political operations. Even before then, he empowered women to lead in the Trump organization. The reason that many people are claiming he dislikes women is because of the rulings that struck down Roe v. Wade and the wave of laws that are restricting abortion, which many people would call reproductive rights. And the reason why I think the reproductive rights issue didn't win the left this election is because it is a wedge issue that is beneath other considerations such as economic and material well-being, the well-being of the family, that most people will put above those issues. But just because that issue did not result in an electoral victory does not mean that issue is not effective in messaging and building social movements that can have a deleterious impact on civil society. Another reason why I think a lot of women are wrongly convinced of this in general, and also convinced that conservatism is anti-woman, is because they have an incorrect apprehension of both political and moral concepts. Reproductive rights as a moral concept is a category error. There is no such thing as a reproductive right. Reproduction is a bodily function that is subsumed under your capacity to act, which is called moral liberty, and you must therefore use that that particular function in a manner consistent with that moral norm. So, if you are attempting to use that moral function by negating it, because abortion is simply the negation of reproduction, quite literally, it destroys the end of reproduction, which is birth, then you're not at all even defending the concept you claim you're defending. You're annihilating it in the name of empowering it. And unfortunately, the chaos of philosophical leftism has made subjectivism and relativism the currencies of the day over any concrete standard by which we can measure these concepts without running afoul of someone's sensibilities. Anyway, the 4B movement, onto them. So 4B, so it started in South Korea. It started in South Korea particularly after a man killed a woman and gave the reasoning as to why he killed the woman by saying that he felt ignored by women. So obviously he had some kind of inferiority complex, which, by the way, a lot of men suffer from. But this kind of sparked a massive social backlash, which spread throughout South Korea and then eventually came over to America in the mid-2010s. It's estimated around 2015, 2016. So 4B, the 4 tenets of 4B, are actually originally in Korean, and I can't speak Korean, so I'm going to tell you the English translations. The original tenets translate to no marriage, no childbirth, no dating, and no sex with men. Now, the logic behind this, as I mentioned, is to assert some kind of defensive mechanism against what the proponents of the 4B movement see as patriarchal oppression or the indifference or the danger of men that could potentially harm them. Here are some videos from people that are supporting the 4B approach.
I will not be giving my money to anyone that helps support misogyny and the patriarchy and keeping women down and making women think that we need to look a certain way or be a certain way, or fuck you. Fuck you. Women, fucking stop dating men. Stop having sex with men. Stop talking to men. Divorce your husbands. Leave your fucking boyfriends. Leave them. They don't give a shit about you.
You do not want to live in a world where men know all they have to do to take away a woman's freedom, to completely control her life, to change her entire circumstance, to change her entire plan, is to get her pregnant. There is no place that you are safe. You are not safe with your boyfriend. You're not safe with your husband.
Something that I will never forget, and a tactic that my abuser used on me, is when he started to realize I was pulling away and I was like readying myself to break up with him finally. He was like all of a sudden switched on a dime. He would always make sure I would take my birth control. But when he started to realize I was trying to leave, he completely flipped his personality. Like, he was like, we need to have a baby. Like, I want you to have my child. He was trying so hard to trap me, and it was so obvious, to the point where, like, he didn't even care that it was obvious that I knew what he was trying to do. Like, he was so desperate to trap me and keep me. And I'll never forget that. That was very scary, and that was the moment where I was like, I need to get out, because not only are you ruining my life, but now you're so desperate to keep me around as your supply. You need to bring another innocent human life into this, because you want to keep abusing me. Like, men are evil, and they really will try to get you pregnant and trap you.
Well, I think there's a few things that I must mention here that make this a particularly troubling movement. Number one, this 4B movement, as novel as it may seem, is not very novel at all. It is a continuation of the ethos christened in the doctrines of second-wave feminism, which stated rather promiscuously that the personal is political, which in one single phrase dissolved all necessary distinctions between private society and governance, and by doing that, allowed there to be a lot of confused thinking and tortured arguments about the role of each in the lives of our civilization, which has then led to antagonism. Not only did it confuse the role between the public and the private, but it also fundamentally confused the relationship between the sexes by making it one of antagonism and conflict between the man and the woman, and going even further than that, making the family as an arena, sort of gladiator's arena, of antagonism and conflict that the woman must overcome through the assertion of her will over the man, which has, of course, led to, I think, a lot of resentment and has led to a lot of misunderstanding of the proper relationships that we as human beings, forget relationships defined on the basis of sex, we as human beings should have if we wish to live morally responsible lives. So in one sense, the movement is not new. And there was a particular movement that actually cropped up in the 60s after the second wave feminism movement began, called political lesbianism, which was not necessarily the same thing as the 4B movement, but it was kind of a corollary, where women would become lesbians for the sake of bucking the patriarchy, for the sake of stepping outside of the norm, and for the sake of depriving the family of, in their view, its reproductive facility, which would be resident within the woman. The 4B movement actually just says, is a little bit more radical than that, and it goes a little bit further than that. But essentially, political lesbianism and the 4B movement kind of embody the same kind of thing. Now, the reason I think the 4B movement is so catastrophic is because it is based on so many different errors. One of the biggest errors of the 4B movement, and it's actually a massive error that many feminist kind of thinkers make, is they interpret values in terms of sex, and particularly in terms of their twisted power relationship type view of the relationship between male and female, in other words, the patriarchy, instead of interpreting values in terms of principles and in terms of the way we interact with those principles in the world, or how the way those principles interact with the world themselves without our help whatsoever. Because there are principles that govern how things work, and we as human beings may interact with them, but we did not create those ideas. They've been here before society even existed. And this is like one of the biggest flaws, is because if you don't understand the distinction between values and personal opinions, or you don't understand the distinction between values and man, you can't understand the distinction between the eternal and the temporal. And I'm not speaking in a religious sense. I'm speaking in a purely concept-based sense. It's that a temporary situation may be used as evidence to disprove an idea. For example, people may say, well, America is a racist country or an evil country because for a period of time there was slavery in America, which actually just completely negates the notion of what America was in the first place. America was conceived as an idea, manifest into reality, and built upon an imperfect structure that had to have time to mature. And if people understood the difference between the eternal and the temporary, the aspiration or the general idea, which is pure, and the temporary, which is impure, we would understand that there's a process that goes to understanding things. Just because you can't understand or see something in the particular temporary moment does not mean that idea is bad or impractical. It may just mean it needs to mature. It may just mean you need to approach it in a different way. But the 4B movement objects to this kind of wisdom by interpreting these ideas, number one, in terms of sex and gender, which denies their eternal potential. But not only that, but also interpreting these ideas within the idea of antagonism, within the relationship of antagonism, seeing them as a matter of survival and conflict, rather than as matters of understanding and refinement. And when you see a particular idea as a matter of survival or conflict, and not as a matter of refining your ability to understand the world, reality will look like a battlefield to you, and everyone will be a combatant, and that will guide how you interact with society. It's this kind of reductionist approach that makes 4B particularly pernicious, in my opinion. The 4B movement's view of sex is based on three core moral errors. Number one, the 4B movement views sex in a way that externalizes it, moralizes it, and weaponizes it. And when you do these three things, what you're doing is you're actually not only misunderstanding the concept of sex, you're using a concept that is meant to be relational, and you're making it antagonistic, which deprives the concept of its original intent and its proper function. So allow me to explain a little bit more. It weaponizes sex. So the 4B movement uses sex as a tool against males. Now, here's what's actually very interesting about this. It weaponizes sex through the doctrine of restraint. It says women abstain from having sex with them, just don't give them anything, which is essentially restraint. You're not actively doing anything, you're simply not doing anything. And everyone that knows logic knows the absence of a positive is not necessarily a negative. Just because I'm not doing something does not mean I'm taking something away from you. Having said that, restraint in and of itself is not something to be weaponized, because restraint is the principle by which we not only organize our social relationships, but we also organize our moral understanding. Without the presence of restraint, quite literally anything goes. Without the presence of restraint, actions that would once be deemed as unjustifiable or evil would be deemed as, there probably would be no concrete way to really define them. In the absence of restraint, the necessary distinctions between certain things like the public and the private realm go away, and therefore our definitions become more inferior. So it tries to weaponize restraint in a way that actually takes away the importance of restraint by defining it solely within an antagonistic context. If I restrain from taking someone's property, I'm not doing it to antagonize them or to deprive them of something. I'm doing it out of a respect for their self-ownership and a respect for their rights. So in other words, restraint by itself is nothing, but restraint within the moral language of a culture is very important. And this weaponization of sex, by using restraint, quite literally detaches sex from the moral language of the culture, and by doing that, atrophies the concept. It literally makes the concept less feasible to be understood in society. And if you cannot understand something, you cannot partake in it in the best way possible, or really at all in a coherent fashion. So the weaponization of sex has downstream implications for knowledge. The moralization of sex. Now, the forward movement is primarily predicated upon a moral assertion, an assertion that there are evils that must be dealt with by virtue of women denying themselves to other people, by denying themselves to men, by denying themselves to the so-called oppressive system. But in this sense, the forward movement conflates morality, conflates this sort of moral standard and mandate with mere tastes. It moralizes sex by claiming the mantle of goodness, by refusing to partake in it based on politics. Now, here's what I mean. When we talk about moral decisions, the great Burlamaqui, who was a philosopher, he mentioned that morality, the term morality, originally meant manners or mores. Basically, how we treat other people, or the norms that govern how we treat other people. And morality has really two sections. The first section is in the realm of duty. We are obligated by certain things, whether it be of our own choosing or whether it just be of our mere existence as human beings, to abstain or to do certain things in fulfillment of moral duty. And number two, we are not obligated, but we are suggested to do certain things for the enhancement of the character of society. So charity is a good way of understanding this. And so moral goodness, properly understood in those two parts, would be undertaken with that understanding. It's 100% achieved through active behavior. You must actively be a moral person or you must actively act morally in order to be a moral person. In order to be morally responsible, you must behave in a way that is morally responsible. The forward movement talks about restraint, and it glorifies restraint for social purpose, which is the opposite of goodness. You cannot be good by definition by restraining yourself in the name of something. You must do something active in order to be good. Let me endeavor upon a deeper definition of moral goodness so you can see the division between the forward movement and that concept. Moral goodness is ordering one's conduct in a manner that conforms to reason and uses reason to respect the principles that underlie civil society, and tends to the preservation and the advancement of particular people. Now, the second part of this, the sort of non-obligatory part that I'm talking about, is most notably known as virtue. Virtuous behavior, while it is preferable, is not obligatory, but is most certainly preferable, because how you treat other people determines how the society is constituted, determines what becomes popular, determines if people are rude or mean, and that really can have an impact on us even if it's not part of our duties. And so by glorifying restraint in the name of morality, the forward movement effectively undercuts the way in which we actualize goodness in society. And not only that, but I think that the premise upon which they do it as well is fundamentally irrational, which also undercuts the way you even approach your duty through reason. That's besides the point. But not only that, it then tries to redefine goodness, again, within that antagonistic context. Therefore, just like restraint, causing goodness to lose its moral meaning, to lose definitional meaning. This is the problem. These concepts are not abstract high-in-the-sky things. These are things that govern not only how we act with other people, but govern the existence of society. You can't have a society that exists within the absence, or a good society that exists within the absence of a proper understanding of restraint. If you did, theft would be okay. If you did, breaking promises would be okay. If you did, murder would be okay. There'd be so many things that would be okay. And you can't have a good society in which virtue is not actively undertaken and pursued by its members on behalf of the goal of fulfilling goodness. Now, the last, I think, moral view, a moral error that the Ford movement has as it relates to sex in particular, is that it externalizes sex. And this is its greatest sin, in my opinion. It externalizes sex by removing sex from its proper private setting, where it is governed by the circumstances of our interest, and it subjects it to an infinite amount of considerations and commentary by making it a tool of social activism. So let me try to explain more what I mean here. Sex is an intimate and inherently private function. This is something that society has recognized for a very long time. It's something that's actually inherent within the act. And this inherently intimate and private function is governed by circumstances that exist within that private sphere. But the moment sex becomes public, the moment sex becomes a matter of spectacle or matter of activism, is the moment that you are quite literally relinquishing your own self-ownership towards outside distant interests to govern how you will act. Not only does that, again, remove sex from its proper consideration, which should be personal and private, but it also creates an unhealthy understanding of that reproductive facility as well, an unhealthy understanding of sex. Sex, my friends, is fundamentally relational. I won't say that it's entirely procreative, because obviously procreation is an end of sex, but sex is way more than just about procreation. It's also about relating to your partner. It's also about sharing a moment. It's also a means of willing the highest good to someone physically in an intimate way. When it's used healthily, when it's used unhealthily, it's entirely just about spreading it around to as many people as you can, exhausting your energy, exhausting yourself, and ending up unhappy. That's the unhealthy version of it. But the healthy versions of it are actually good for bond building, and they're good for creating relationships that are fundamentally healthy. But the moment it goes beyond that context and it becomes a tool for social activism is a moment all of those things are fundamentally disgraced and gotten rid of, because they are no longer the primary consideration. The primary consideration is, how can I make my vision of heaven upon earth? How can I make my ideological idea mean more than the other functions that may have come into place when we consider sex as a fundamentally private act? These are the three sins of the 4B movement. It externalizes sex, removing it from its proper context and making it unhealthy by subjecting it to political considerations. It moralizes sex by refusing to do what goodness demands and also confusing the definition of goodness. And most importantly, it weaponizes sex by making it an antagonistic pursuit as opposed to a relational pursuit, because sex can only be understood as a relational pursuit, and the moment it becomes unrelational or anti-relational is the moment it becomes immoral. This is one of the reasons why forcing someone to have sex is wrong, because it went from a relational pursuit to an anti-relational pursuit, because relationships must be built upon mutual understanding, respect, and consent. All these principles invalidate the 4B movement as a valid way of dealing with anything, much less trying to mediate political differences in a very divided society. And so I think ultimately what we should take away from this movement is that it confuses a lot of things, and it taps in to the bitterness and envy that some people have in response to a conception they have about how men are, how societies are, how systems are. And the fundamental problem of the 4B movement, which is also the fundamental problem of feminism and many other radical revolutionary ideologies, is that they see societies in terms of systems, in terms of institutions, in terms of classes, in terms of abstract groups, as opposed to seeing society and civilization in terms of free will, creativity, individual relationships, and the pursuit of moral principles and the application of creative will. All those things I just mentioned are far more enriching ways to see society, because those things I just mentioned are the reason civilization came about in the first place. See, people don't get this. The difference between primitive man and barbaric man was primitive man's ability to use the world around him to sustain himself. The difference between barbaric man and civilized man, which is the stage we're in right now, was barbaric man's ability to go from sustenance to creativity, and to, instead of sustaining, He flourishes by applying his creative will and his reason to the world to make something greater than what he has. To sustain is to keep what you have. To be creative is to apply your will to create more and build more and gain more than what you have. And that's where civilization comes from. The root of this is based on these sort of abstract ideas that attack the core of these civilizational pillars by seeing it in a way that is fundamentally alien to our history as human beings. If we saw society through these ways I just mentioned, there'd be a much healthier appraisal of the relationships between the sexes. There'd be a much healthier appraisal of the family. There'd be a much healthier appraisal of political issues, because it would not be a matter of existential dread, or would not be a matter of the survival of one group over the other. It would rather be a matter, most importantly, of what people do, what motivates them, why they do it, and how we can reconcile that, and even be okay with that in some sense, a sense of the world, in a world that is fundamentally imperfect in the face of humans that believe they have perfect visions. So ultimately, the 4B movement is, I think, based on ideas that only operate well in fantasy, but have a ruinous effect in reality. And any woman, I don't care who you are, I don't care what your politics is, if you have an objection to how the election went, and your boyfriend or your husband voted in a way that you don't like, I'm not saying that it is your moral duty to stay with these people. You have the ability and the right to associate with whomever you wish, and I most certainly hope you do. But I am saying that wisdom is knowing the difference between your desires and what is necessary. And sometimes your desires will throw you against what is necessary and will put you in a place where your actions were rash, they were ill-considered, and they were based on nothing more than a fleeting emotion that ultimately, in the grand scheme of that context, whether it be a relationship or a marriage, weren't all that important in the first place. We must learn to detach our personal lives from the chaos going around us, or it will swallow us up. So, if there are women that are watching this that are participants of the 4B movement or want to do it because they're upset about how Trump won, that's your prerogative. But know that wisdom may demand something else of you. And know that not only that, but you have to reconcile differences to function in the world. I don't care if these are distinctions and differences between certain subjects, the difference between math and reading. I don't care if these are distinctions and differences between people that you may have in your family who you may disagree with. I don't care if these are distinctions and differences between someone you meet on the street who looks at you a certain way you don't like it. Distinctions and differences go to the very core of how we operate as human beings, and you must reconcile them. Running away from them or portraying goodness in this very odd way to get away from them is not going to help you. It's not going to advance you. It's only going to make you worse off. So I would encourage you, choose the wise path and perhaps have a more holistic view of this whole thing. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to get our message out there. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.